Bouchard here, and I am here with an author with Illumify Media, Dr. Dale Sims. Now, Dr. Sims is a full-time professor with Dallas Baptist University. He's been the Associate Dean and then the Dean of the College of Business, and he's currently serving as Senior Professor of Systems Technology and Information Management. And Dale has written a fabulous, fabulous book, a memoir, and it is just absolutely beautiful. And we are here to talk about that today. Dale, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And thanks for your kind words. It was a joy writing the book.
I tell you, the first time I read it, I was just blown away. And it's the type of thing that you're writing and your story, it just sticks with you. I found myself thinking about the imagery and the themes in the book and the characters in the book. I mean, they're true people. This is a true story. But I found myself thinking about them just off and on, thinking about all of that off and on over the coming days. It's the kind of story that really, really stays with you. So let me ask you this. What motivated you to write this book?
Of course, the story is an old story. It took place over 50 years ago. And it's a story that very few people know about me. My brothers, who are older now, when we were there in New Mexico, they were just very, very young. And they don't remember anything about that time period in our family history. Recently, they began to ask questions, and I thought, well, maybe it's time for me to write the story and tell the story, not just for them, but for other people as well. I think there were some things that I wanted to get across to people, things such as racial relations, cultural differences among people, how you can kind of bridge that gap, how you can be a stranger in a strange land and still enjoy the experience. And so I wanted to share that with a lot of different people.
So set up the story for us just a little bit. We don't want to give too much away, but how did your family, so just a little bit about where the story takes place and the uniqueness of the setting of the story.
My dad decided that he wanted to help with some mission work in the state of New Mexico, especially among the Navajo and Pueblo Indians. He had heard about an opportunity, and he just picked up the family and took us there. Of course, when you're only 7 years old, you don't get a voice whether you get to go or not. If the family goes, you go with them. And so that's how we got there. That's the reason that we went principally. The things that occurred while we were there, I think, were surprising both to my parents and to me. They were not things that you would expect. New Mexico has on the license plates of the cars the enchanted land, I think is what it is. The enchanted country, enchanted land, something like that. And it is enchanting mainly because it's so different. There's a different feel to it, kind of a timelessness. There's I don't know, the air's a little different in New Mexico. You smell the sagebrush and the pine trees, the pinyon pines, and it's just a different feel when you go to New Mexico. I don't know if you've ever been to Santa Fe, but when you go to Old Town Santa Fe, it feels old. It just feels like it's been there for a long, long time. And it's even a different feeling when you walk into some of the areas of the reservations. It is as if it's been there a long, long time. It's as if you almost feel the ghosts of the people that inhabited that area, and they're still there. I know that sounds a little strange, but it just seems that way sometimes.
Well,
So I think that's the reason that things were so startling to us. It is just a different place.
and that really comes across in your writing. You really do create that. There's very much a sense of, wow, I have really entered into a land of enchantment as you write about it. Now, I don't want to give too much away because I don't want to ruin the story for the readers, but the cross-cultural experiences that you experienced really in your own backyard, living on the edge of the reservation, and the relationships and the friendships and the experiences you had, they're just absolutely fascinating. And so I wanted you to share just what a memory that you had as you're 7 and you are being introduced to really this completely other different world.
Certainly. So let me talk about the first time that my dad took me onto the reservation. We went to the reservation. My dad was checking in to the mission area, and he just kind of turned me loose. He said, "Don't go far, stick around. If I call, then you come running." So I'm wandering around outside of the mission area, outside on the reservation, and I'm surrounded by sheep and goats, and there's horses roaming around, and there's a lot of people who, they look different than me. They're speaking a language I don't understand. And one thing caught my attention. There was a man who was staked out on the ground. His arms and hands and legs were staked to the ground, and he was laying in the dust. He was an Indian, and close beside him there was a log, and there were 2 men sitting on the log. And next to the man on the ground there was a woman who was giving him water and occasionally some food every now and then. And then kind of dancing around him was a medicine man. And he wore kind of like pelts, like animal pelts, and he had feathers, and he was painted red and yellow and black, and he was singing, and he had a tortoise shell kind of a gourd type thing that he was rattling, and he had a little bag that had something in it that was a powder, and I think it was cornmeal, I think, but I don't know. But he was throwing it on the man who was staked to the ground. So I went and I stood behind the 2 men on the log. And eventually the man on the ground saw me, and he said, "Come here." So I walked up close to him, and he said, "I see something in your eyes." And he just seemed crazy. The guy on the ground just seemed crazy. And so I kind of backed up a little bit. The 2 men on the log turned out to be his uncles. One of them didn't want to have anything to do with me, but the other man kind of took pity on me, and he said, "You come with me. I'm going to get you away from this area." And he said, "The medicine man is working on some things with this man, and I'll take you and I'll talk to you about what it means to be an Indian and some of the things that are going on." So the man who took me and was talking with me, his name, he said, was Andrew, but you could call me Andy. And he said, "That's not my Navajo name. That's just a nickname that I have." He said he had been in the military, that in World War II, and that he'd been a code talker. I didn't know what that was. He explained that. And he kind of walked with me, and he talked to me about what I saw and my perceptions. Of course, I I didn't know anything about the Indians other than maybe what you would see in the movies. And I was only 7. So just imagine, I had a lot of questions, and he was very honest with me. He just said, "You'll never be an Indian. Don't try to be an Indian, but I do want you to kind of understand." He was very, very clear about that. He felt like it was important that young white people understood his tribe and his nation and why they did what they did. And it was a very, very much an eye-opening. I told him, and he said he was a Christian. And I said, well, I don't think that looks very Christian to have a medicine man, going around and, shaking gourds and everything. And he said, I was in Nevada one time. And he said, I saw a lady up on a stage, and her face was painted blue, and she had red lipstick and blue around her eyes, and she had a real pale face. And she danced on the stage, and she asked people for money, and she healed people and prophesied. And he said, so why is that a lot different than what we're doing right here? And I didn't have a good answer. I maybe have a better answer now, but at the same time, it made me begin to think about, especially the Navajo and later the Pueblo, made me start to think about them in a different way. And that set the stage, probably set the stage for a lot of things for the rest of my life.
So didn't he at that point kind of give you the name? Or at some point you mentioned young white people understanding, but that became your name, right? It wasn't they gave you that name?
Yes. Oh yes. From the very beginning, they called me Young White. And there was a time when I questioned them about that. And I said, why do you call me Young White? What are you saying when you call me Young White? And he said, well, Young White, he said, your father is old, and he's a preacher. We would probably call him Preacher Jim. But since we don't know your name and we don't ask, then we'll call you Young White. He said, we could call you a lot of other things. He said, you have freckles, we could call you Spotted Face. You're skinny, we could call you Skinny Butt. He said, but we have decided that maybe we would call you Young White. And I said, oh, well, that sounds good to me. And that kind of stuck. That was my Indian nickname while I was with them, and that shows up through the book. So they just called me Young White.
Dale, you tell this story and you're sharing these memories through the eyes of your 7-year-old self. And there is an innocence of boyhood that comes through your observations and different things through the story. And yet at the same time, your writing is so insightful and it's vivid. Your imagery is vivid and frankly, it's just very beautiful. Your writing is just very beautiful. And so it's a striking balance that you managed to find as you're writing this story. Was that difficult to find and to attain, that balance between, telling the story through the eyes of a child and yet bringing to it just the insights and the vivid imagery and the beauty that you do in telling the story?
Certainly. It is a kind of a tightrope act when you write like that. So what I kind of adopted a process where I would spend a little bit of time meditating before I wrote, and I would put myself in my mind back in that time. And I would recall everything that I could about what I saw, what I heard, what I tasted, how I felt about things. I would just, in my mind, I would make it very clear, And then as I wrote it down, I tried to write it with my 7-year-old or 8-year-old voice, and not my my 64-year-old voice. I think that was in some ways difficult, in other ways not, because I tried to keep away from making judgment calls on things. I tried to keep away from too much explanation, to let the reader try to understand themselves. And it is a difficult thing to do. It is difficult to go back over 50 years and say, well, what was that like? Yes, I kind of remember that. I remember how I felt about that, and then describe that to the reader. My whole goal was to pick up the reader and take them to that time and that place and help them to see what I saw, to help them to see what I heard, help them to see what I felt, to see the cultural things around me, and to get a feel for my emotions, my take on everything at that time, not now, but at that time.
So the year that this story is taking place is what?
The story takes place in 1962 and 1963.
Yeah.
Just a note about that. So it was about 100 years, almost exactly 100 years before that Kit Carson had forced the Navajo onto reservations. So for about 100 years, the Navajo had been on that land. They had been given some increases in their land and a few things, but times had been that 100 years had been a very difficult 100 years for the Navajo. And as a tribe, as a people, as a nation, they were trying to figure out how to honor the past and move into the future. And that was really obvious to me as a kid. Even then, it wasn't that they rejected modern things. It wasn't that they were extremely angry at the white people. It was more along the lines of, who are we? What are we going to do with ourselves? And how do we honor the past? How do we honor our heritage? How do we honor what is good about us as Navajo, or good about us as Pueblo? How do we do that? And how do we move into this 20th century? And it was obvious to them that they had to do it. It was obvious to all of them. I will say one other thing. There seemed to be this kind of sense of, in some ways, kind of a helplessness, and I believe that it drove a lot of the poverty. I think it drove a lot of the drinking, a lot of alcoholism, and other problems that they had. I think it kind of drove them to that. But I'm very proud to say that the people that I knew, the Navajos that I knew, the Pueblo that I knew, even then in the early 60s, were trying very hard to break through all of that and to figure out where to go. I don't talk a lot about the Bureau of Indian Affairs in the book, but I always got the impression that sometimes the Navajo or the Pueblo wanted to do something, and the Bureau would say, no, you can't do that. So that would be difficult. I think that'd be difficult to take. Not always feeling like you're in control of your own destiny.
Dale, the themes in your book are they're timeless themes. You talk about the complexity of family relationships, the innocence and the trauma of our childhood, our growing up years, friendship, sacrifice, finding your true voice, finding your courage. They're just timeless themes that are woven. throughout this just fascinating and just poignant story that you tell. Talk to me a little bit about some of the themes in the book.
Certainly. So over the years, people have talked with me about my family, and I don't talk a lot about my family. And a lot of people say, "Oh, you must have come from such a beautiful, wonderful family. Look at what you've accomplished and how you've accomplished these things." And I want people to understand that I think every family is dysfunctional in some way. I just, as I got older, you kind of recognize that. And you also know that just because things aren't great in a family doesn't mean that you don't love the people in the family. It doesn't mean that you can't proceed on with your life. But I think it is a conscious decision on your part to do both of those things, to love, to forgive, to move on. So that's one theme, the very complexity of family relationships. I think another theme has to do with courage. And I don't think that everybody comes through childhood with courage. I just don't think that they do, but I think it's important that you do. Children are resilient. I will say that. Children are resilient. But I was particularly challenged to be courageous, to think of myself differently. And both my father challenged me to do that, and my Indian friends, my Indian mentors, I'm going to put it that way, as a matter of fact. And they challenged me to look at the world realistically, to think about myself in a different way. And I will also say, and I don't know how I can not even talk about it, because it's been another big, huge part of my life, and that's this idea of faith in God. So God himself, through his word and through the people that he has brought into my life, and just through working in my life, has taught me a lot about this idea of courage, this idea of perseverance under difficult times. All of those things are interwoven into, they're themes that are interwoven into my life that I think other people have seen. I think that maybe other people need to see.
Now, you are a Fulbright Scholar. Tell me about that.
Thank you. Yes. One of the things that I've always wanted to do is to serve my country. I could not go into the military. That's probably another book, but but what I could do was that I could serve the United States as an ambassador, an educational ambassador to another country. I could definitely do that without going the Fulbright Scholar route. But by being a Fulbrighter, I could represent my country. It's interesting, as I went to the country of Latvia, and I taught at a small college in Latvia, in a town that is really a beautiful, wonderful little town. It's got about 30,000 people. I'm not sure everybody who goes and does the Fulbright feels like I did, but I felt like that I represented my country. I felt like I represented my family. I felt like I represented my faith. I felt like I represented the state of Texas, the university that I worked at. So I was there for 6 months. I was there without my wife. She had to stay here in the United States and help with our family. And it was a very kind of a lonely time, but it was also a very rich time. And I'm so glad that I did that. It is a great honor, and it is a privilege, and it is a pleasure to say that I'm a Fulbright Scholar and that I represented my country as a kind of an educational ambassador to another country.
Dale, you've had such fascinating experiences. What are you continuing to work on? You're continuing to write. You've got other things in the works and different things. So tell me a little bit about that.
I'm working on another book about when I leave my family and when I go out into the world. I do think it's important for people to see that even though you leave, and you may not always leave on with good auspices or a lot of resources, that you can actually have a very, very good life and a successful life. I think a lot of that has to do with faith. I think a lot of it has to do with courage. I think a lot of it has to do with perseverance. And so I'm working on a book about that.
Well, I can definitely understand why readers would be asking, okay, what happened next? Because so much happened to during that year in 1962 when you were 7. So much went on in that year, and you really began that year of your life and ended that year of your life in a very, very different place, and almost as a very, very different young man. And it's just, like I said, it's just an absolute, it just stays with you. It just, the images and the themes and the things that you share as you are recalling what went on in that year of your life are just really, really moving and really do have an impact on the reader. I know that it very much had impact on me as I was reading it. So let me ask you one last question in terms of advice for other writers. Anything come to mind?
Well, yes. I think to write, to be a good writer, you have to write. You just have to write a lot. So I read a book one time that said that it takes about 10,000 hours, or about 5,000, or about 10,000 hours, or about 5 years of work to really get to become kind of like an expert in something. And they give certain examples. And I think for a writer, you have to write hundreds of thousands of words. And I think it's important that you write not just linking words together, but putting words down that touch other people. Words that will help them smell or see or hear what you want them to smell, see, or hear. And also, I think it's important not simply to just write and to write those things that transport people, but I think you have to be a good reader too. So I read about 50 books a year, about one a week. And I read a lot of different things. I read books on leadership. I read books in my discipline. I read magazines that come from professional journals that I have to stay up with for my discipline. I read history. I read a lot of history. I read a lot of anthropology. I read fiction. Michener and James Clavell are two of my favorite writers, and their books are like 1,000 pages long, but I always have 2 or 3 books going at the same time. I have books stacked beside my bed. I think it's important to be a reader as well as it is to be a writer. So if something if you see a writer who is writing well, then you can actually pick up on some of their techniques, why that worked, why that looks good, why did that move me, or why do I remember that? Then you can incorporate that into your writing as well. And that's not really a ripoff. That's a technique. And anybody who's a musician, if you think about musicians, will also tell you there's certain musical techniques for writing a good good score or a good song or something like that. So the final thing that I would say to writers is write about what you know. And if you don't know enough about it, then do your research before you write. If you're going to write about science, then make sure that you understand the science. If you're going to write about history, then make sure you understand that time era very well. And so I would say that those are the things: write a lot, read a lot, make sure that you transport people with your words, and write about what you know.
Dale, this has been great. I have loved hearing your thoughts on the book and on the writing process and what really motivates you. And again, congratulations on this book. It is absolutely fabulous. And I just want readers to just really give it a shot, because it is just a moving story. And so congratulations on what you've accomplished with this.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your help along that process, as we got that book going. It's been a real pleasure.